Okay, let's get started. So to get us oriented, I really would be remiss if I didn't mention that phosphogypsum production is not the only harmful step in the process when it comes to making phosphate fertilizers. It really begins at the mining stage. It's a four-part process that begins 60 feet below the earth in open pit strip mines. In Florida alone, over 475,000 acres of these of land has been destroyed this way. That land is never restored. It's only reclaimed at best. And we know that biodiversity never returns to previous levels before that mining occurred. Then we move on to the beneficiation stage where that ore is separated from a clay and sand mixture that produces radioactive clay slime areas that the industry has sort of rebranded into calling clay settling areas. Also devastating. Then finally, we move to phosphoric acid and phosphogypsum production, which is the third step in the process. And this is all for a final product that we know causes harmful algal blooms and fertilizer runoff issues, nutrient pollution, hypoxia, the Gulf Dead Zone. So, but for today, each of those is deserving of its own workshop. But for today, we're just going to be focusing on that third step in the process, which is phosphogypsum production. Here's a typical phosphoric acid production facility, phosphoric acid being the main feed product in final fertilizer product production. And here is a sort of formula for how that is produced. We start with that beneficiated phosphate rock, which was beneficiated in a process using proprietary chemicals that we don't even know the chemical makeup of. But finally, we get that rock, which is slurried or transported by rail to a phosphogypsum or a phosphate fertilizer facility. That rock is then added to sulfuric acid, and that acidification process leads to calcium sulfate, which is the chemical name for phosphogypsum, a poisonous gas known as hydrogen fluoride, and then finally our product that the fertilizer industry is after, phosphoric acid. Later, at a downstream operation, ammonia is added to that phosphoric acid and we get monoammonium phosphate and diammonium phosphate, which are fertilizer products. You can see that poison gas is then scrubbed. It's a harmful air pollutant regulated under the Clean Air Act, so it's required to be scrubbed. And we get fluorosilicic acid from that process. The fertilizer industry then sells that to municipalities for water fluoridation. And whatever they do not sell also ends up in phosphogypsum stacks in that pond water on the top that you see there. So that process creates 5 tons of radioactive phosphogypsum for every 1 ton of phosphoric acid product. We're talking large volumes of waste, 46 million tons per year. And why is that phosphogypsum radioactive? The norm, the naturally occurring radioactive material from the phosphate rock, has its own radioactivity. Now, when we say naturally occurring, that doesn't mean it's harmless. It's harmless when it's 60 feet below the ground where it belongs. When we bring that up to the surface, we're redistributing that radioactivity into places it no longer belongs. Again, part of why that land is so hard to reclaim in a way that's safe. Depending on the quality of the phosphate rock, the chemical reaction also concentrates the radioactivity in the rock by a factor of 60, and that transfers that radioactivity into the phosphogypsum waste, which is now no longer a norm waste, but a technologically enhanced norm. So what kind of radionuclides do we have? We have many, but the most concerning of which I've highlighted here is radium-226, the most abundant. It's a decay product of uranium. And the average in the United States, or in Florida at least, where the most phosphogypsum is produced, is 35 picocuries per gram. For reference, background soils have 0.5 to 1 picocurie per gram. That's the average of a background soil. So this is not merely slightly radioactive. There is no safe level of radioactivity. This is pretty radioactive stuff that we're dealing with. Radium-226 has a half-life of 1,600 years, meaning that by the year 3,260, there would still be half of it left. And it usually takes about 20 half-lives for radium to decay all the way, meaning we're going to be dealing with these radioactive phosphogypsum stacks for at least 32,000 years. Other toxic constituents listed in Appendix 8 to the hazardous waste regulations are contained within phosphogypsum. They include arsenic, lead, nickel, cadmium, chromium, silver, antimony, copper, mercury, and thallium. Also very large amounts of fluoride, because phosphate rock is about 2 to 4% fluoride. That's released by that acidulation process. Most of these are toxic heavy metals, either known or probable carcinogens. So what is this doing to our health? We really don't know what it's doing to residential people that live near the stacks, but we do know that phosphate worker mortality has been studied in a cohort, a long-term study, because a lot of these diseases have a long latency, and the mortality due to all causes was increased, including lung cancer and leukemia, in this long-term study of phosphate production workers. We would like to see similar epidemiological studies in the phosphogypsum, in the communities surrounding phosphogypsums. We don't have those yet, and that's a data gap based on misdirected science from the industry. In Florida, for instance, we have the Florida Institute of Phosphate Research, which is funded by the state severance tax on phosphate mined, and the majority of their studies go to looking at alternative uses of phosphogypsum that have already been banned by the EPA because phosphogypsum is too radioactive. So what's wrong with the stacks that we have? We have over 70 of them scattered throughout the United States, mainly in Florida, Louisiana, North Carolina, and Idaho. But in particularly in Florida, we have a sinkhole problem here. You can see the number of subsidence reports that Florida has had, and highlighted in the middle is a sinkhole that's happened under a stack. We've had 5 of those in the state of Florida underneath stacks, only 3 of which have been reported. So here's the first one in 1994 at New Wales, releasing millions of gallons of toxic processed water into the Floridan aquifer, which is the drinking water source for 10 million people. And then, of course, the 2016 sinkhole, which released 215 million gallons of processed water directly into the Floridan aquifer. That waste is still trying to be recovered by the company that owned that stack, Mosaic. They're currently pumping 44 gallons per minute to this day, 4 years later, out of their recovery wells in an attempt to contain that waste within their zone of capture, which is supposed to be on their property boundary. Now, whether or not that recovery is even possible is really unknown. There's a lot we don't know about our aquifer system. It's a complex karst geological formation with lots of fast-moving conduits. But we do know that studies have shown that the fate of that processed water and the fate and transport of that processed water is unknown. So it's likely it could possibly be reaching people's wells. We simply just don't know where that processed water has really all gone. Then there are 2 other sinkholes that happened in 2004 and 2013. These were not reported to the public. Public records request turned these up. So this is a schematic representation of one that happened in 2004. The industry called this an anomaly, but geologists say that has the functional equivalent of a sinkhole. Again, another processed water loss incident. And here we have a same thing happening in 2013. Again, not reported to the public. So what's happening is these stacks have gotten too large as the industry, which was once 30 different fertilizer industries, has now consolidated to really 3 main fertilizer companies, those being Mosaic Fertilizer, J.R. Simplot in Idaho and Wyoming, and then Nutrien, which was formerly PCS, in North Carolina and North Florida, and also Louisiana. Since they're so large, and especially in Louisiana, in Louisiana, which has weak clay soils, that pile is shifting. So we're at risk of losing hundreds of millions, if not 1 billion gallons of processed water, because that pile was built too high, too large, even though EPA recognized back in 1990 that stacks in Louisiana should not be larger than 12 meters high. We're also subject to climate change and hurricanes and sea level rise. Here is the Riverview stack in 2004 had not even a direct hit, but high winds and rain eroded a berm atop the Riverview stack and sent 65 million gallons of processed water into Hillsborough Bay, caused documented death and injury to numerous estuarine species, caused a lot of die-off of mangroves, tidal marsh, and seagrass. Here's where that Riverview stack is located. And as you can see, this hurricane didn't even it came from the east. Riverview is on the west coast of Florida and still was able to cause that much damage. So when we do get that direct hit, and every time a hurricane enters the Gulf, I hold my breath because so many of our phosphogypsum stacks are located on the Gulf, out of convenience to the industry to both ship ore and fertilizer back and forth between the ports of Louisiana and Florida. Then there's just sea level rise by itself. So here is the Mississippi Phosphate stack. There are 2 stacks there that are now constitute a Superfund site. Within some even moderate sea level rise scenarios, we start to see inundation. And then at the 6-foot scenario, we see definite inundation there. It's even worse in Florida on the Gulf Coast. This is again the Riverview stacks. It's already below the mean high water line, but with just 1 foot of sea level rise, we begin to see inundation, and that's not accounting for storm surge and hurricanes that are coming. Here's a picture of the Riverview stack. This stack is purportedly closed. You can tell that a stack is closed when it has that vegetative cover on the side, but yet it still has that pond because we like to use our closed stacks here in Florida, and that pond is still holding toxic radioactive process wastewater as part of the active stack system. And that arrow is pointing to Tampa Bay, just so you can see how close this stack is to Tampa Bay. Here's a neighborhood in Riverview built a few hundred yards from the active stack. These are also an environmental justice issue. So, for example, Progress Village, which you can see on this map right next to the active stack, was designed in the 1950s as a means to provide homeownership to displaced Black residents from Tampa and the construction of the I-275 highway. It was great while it lasted, and then a few decades later, in 1984, county commissioners approved a phosphogypsum stack just a few hundred yards away. The company at the time, Gardenier, established a sort of many beautification projects, a scholarship fund, things that really are a drop in the bucket compared to having to live next to a radioactive phosphogypsum stack and dealing with the dust that's blowing off. I've walked through that neighborhood. I've seen the dust myself. Dust in Florida and Louisiana and the Southeast in general is not as big of an issue as it is out west, and we're going to hear later from somebody who lives out west in Idaho. Dust there is a significant problem, A, because the climate is different, and B, because the process in the ore is slightly different. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt Rhoda over at Healthy Gulf to talk about, to introduce our speakers that live in these communities. Where'd you go, Matt? Matt, you muted yourself.
Okay, there we go. Hi, thank you so much, Rachel. I'm Matt Rhoda. I am the Senior Policy Director for Healthy Golf, based out of New Orleans, but work in 5 Gulf states. And I have the pleasure to be kind of the MC to introduce everybody here. So what basically the structure here is, first of all, we're going to talk about people that are living with and around active stacks that are happening, and then we're going to be moving on to, well, what happens whenever they quote unquote close a stack? What's going to happen then? So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and this is Shannon Ansley. Shannon Ansley lives in Pocatello, Idaho. So welcome from Idaho down to the Gulf, where the J.R. Simplot Don plant phosphogypsum stack is located. She is a member of Portneuf Resource Council and has over 30 years of experience as an environmental hydrogeologist. So take it away, Shannon.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Can everyone hear me? All right. Portneuf Resource Council. Just to give you an idea of where Pocatello is, I believe I'm the only one west of the Mississippi, perhaps today, but we're located about midway between Salt Lake City, Utah, and Yellowstone National Park. Our phosphogypsum stack here, just outside of this town of Pocatello, towns of Pocatello and Chubbuck, have the gyp stack is operated and owned by the J.R. Simplot Company, Don plant, since 1944. And the next few slides, I think Rachel is going to progress those. So this is what I see on my way to work every morning. I live about 4.5 miles away from the gyp stack, but what you're seeing is the Don plant, Simplot Don plant. There are, as you can see, homes located there. The nearest residence to the gyp stack here is about 1/2 mile, but within a 1 to 2 mile radius, there are a significant number of developments that are happening, residential developments, and the local planning and zoning, county and city, do not warn and let residents know what they're living next to. The next slide, please. This is just some photos of our gyp stack. It's difficult to get a sense of scale here, but this stack is currently about 463 feet high, and it is built up alongside the face of a mountain range. You can kind of see the mountains in the background. In the next slide. Just another image of from the interstate toward the gyp stack and the factory, and we can go to the next slide. So in Idaho is located in a high mountain desert area, and our precipitation rates range between 10 and 15 inches of precipitation a year. So we're pretty dry out here, and we're also quite windy. And some days, many days in the summers especially, this is what we see. You're looking at the gyp stack right there, and a lot of dust blowing in from the desert, but also wind that picks up dust from the gyp stack and blows it onto the nearby residential areas. In the next slide. This map view gives you a little bit of a, just to kind of locate yourself. As you can see, the Don plant in the middle there, it is part of the Eastern Mashad Flats Superfund site that spans across the Fort Hall Indian Reservation boundary the yellow line between the towns of Chubbuck and Pocatello. The blue line is the Port Neuf River. The river runs from the southeast toward the northwest to the Fort Hall Bottoms area, but you can also see that it runs immediately adjacent to the Don Plant gypstack. And let's see the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the current height of the gypstack is about 463 feet. It occupies about 532 acres, but because Simplot, the Don Plant, is an operating facility within a Superfund site, there is a planned expansion. They hope to be able to make the stack over 500 feet high and increase the area from 532 to about 1,300 acres approximately. So the next slide. This is just, I've got a couple of photos from Google Earth of just historical photos earlier in the gypstack that currently, well, let's go to the next slide. What they're doing now, the contamination here is there's a lot of groundwater contamination and surface water contamination from our gypstack. The current operations are they're laying down a high density polyethylene liner and putting all of their processed water and their phosphogypsum waste in these lined cells, hoping that evapotranspiration will take place and that no more processed water will infiltrate through the pile. In this lower left-hand corner of this picture, you can see a small section of the Port Neuf River, and you can see how close it is to the gypstack. And the next slide. Next slide, if possible. This is just a summary of the Eastern Mashab Flat Superfund site, designated in 1990. There are just to the west of the Simplot facility is the FMC facility, which is no longer operational, but there's a lot of residual waste that was left in place when FMC left. The impacts to air, soil, surface water, and groundwater affect the Fort Hall Reservation, the residents there, and the citizens of Chubbuck and Pocatello. And the next slide, please. Thank you. The current situation is Simplot is running out of room for their phosphogypsum waste. So they approached BLM and asked for a land swap to get more federal land given to Simplot so that they can make their phosphogypsum waste pile larger. And at present, they have gotten permission to do that. The expansion area is the red hatchered area, and you can see that the waste will be closer to the Port Neuf River and also closer to the citizens of Pocatello and Chubbuck. And my last two slides are just, there's the phosphate industry here is heavily married to the state government of Idaho, and many decisions are made in favor of Simplot. And the next slide is just some additional reading if anyone's interested. So, and that's my presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And just so please put your questions in the chat, and we will be having some Q&A at the end. So we're trying to keep track of the questions in the chat. So please keep just putting those questions in there, and we'll try to address as many as we can at the end. Next, we have a couple speakers from Louisiana. We have Milton Kayette and Daryl Malik Wiley. Milton lives in St. James Parish, Louisiana, where Mosaic Fertilizer's Uncle Sam phosphogypsum pile is located. He is a founding member of Rise St. James, a nonprofit grassroots faith-based organization formed to advocate for racial and environmental justice in St. James Parish. And then also we have Daryl Malik Wiley, who works with the Sierra Club as a senior organizing representative in the Environmental Justice and Community Partnership Program. He has been working with community groups in Louisiana's Cancer or Death Alley for the past 38 years. So, welcome.
Thank you. Like I say, I'm Milton Kayette. I live in St. James Parish. I live right across the road from one of those stacks. And there are two stacks really, one on the east bank and one on the west bank. But this particular one now here is on the east bank of the Mississippi River. And like I said, I live on the west bank of the Mississippi River. But when I was coming up, when this plant was built back in the 60s, and when I was a teenager, the fume and stuff, we could smell it that comes across the river whenever the wind is blowing across the river where I live as a young teenager. And they kill all the trees and stuff that it was letting out. Our pecan trees, we had pecan trees for days. But after it started releasing all that toxic fume, it killed the pecan. It didn't kill them. It didn't produce anything. There would be beautiful leaves and stuff, but no pecan. And now they're beginning to bear pecans now. But when I was a kid, it stopped. When I was a kid, we used to go pick up pecans by the sack. But when they started operation, it was called, I think, Atrico at the time. And it started killing, it wouldn't kill the trees wouldn't bear no type of pecan. And the smell was so horrible that if you smell it, you would get a headache. So many days I have gotten headaches from this radioactive stuff they were letting out. And I think still today they still do it, but now I live about a mile or 2 miles from it. That's the stack right there. And I live about 2 miles from it, but when I was a kid, I actually lived less than a half a mile. It was on one side of the road and I was on the other side. And I didn't know what it was. All of this sulfuric acid, not acid, when at that time, they say the stuff came from Florida and they processed it in St. James Parish. I didn't know nothing about it until until we formed the Rise St. James organization, and I got more involved with the stuff that we have in our parish where I live. That's it. Beautiful rock. It's 200 and some feet high. And last year we had a break in the base. So it was hauling dirt around the clock to stop the leak. And then they eventually stopped it. And they couldn't stop it. It was gotten into the waterways, into the canals, and into the bayous, and also into the Lake Pontchartrain. And from Lake Pontchartrain to the Gulf of Mexico. It was made all the way there. You know, so like I said, it was hauling dirt or stirring dirt around the clock to stop that, to build up a dam to stop this leak. I pass every now and then and look at that and say, Lord, don't let this stack burst on me while I'm passing by.
Yeah. Thank you, Milton. Let me talk a little bit, please.
Okay.
So I've been working on this stack since 1984. Like Milton said, it was built in the 1960s until the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972. They used to discharge all this radioactive material into the Mississippi River, which is a drinking water supply of the city of New Orleans and all the communities between the stack and the city of New Orleans. And the Clean Water Act stopped them from doing that and started made them start building stacks. In '83, their permit was up for renewal, and they wanted to once again dump it all into the Mississippi River. And I didn't think that was a good idea. So I started researching researching it. And first, they only were going to have one hearing. It was going to be in Baton Rouge, which was north of where all the people drink the water. And we started researching it and found out with their own studies, they talked about it had a negative impact on aquatic life when mixed with Mississippi River water. So I looked and found out what they were talking about was 100% of the aquatic life died in the mixing zone with this stuff into the Mississippi River. And it was a very big fight for almost a year. We had to fight to get the plant so they wouldn't discharge in the Mississippi River. And you have to understand, these companies have tremendous political power. They inserted language in a unrelated bill in Congress that required EPA to grant them a permit of some kind by a set date. And luckily, we were able to stop that because of some legal things that we were able to do. It would have completely changed the phosphorus nitrogen ratio in the Mississippi River, which is against the Clean Water Act. And that's what was the, quote, legal hook. Last January, the company owns where the stacks are at. They have more land than what the stack is, and they lease their land out to a sugarcane farmer to grow sugarcane. He was out there trying to harvest his sugarcane, and his equipment kept running into the ground because it had been raised up. And he found out that what was happening was that the stack was starting to collapse. And he reported it to the company. The company had no idea that anything was wrong until the farmer said something. If he hadn't found it, we would have had a collapsed wall and would have had all this waste running into the Blind River, it's called, then Lake Pontchartrain, and would have been a world-class ecological disaster. So these situations, it's just tremendously bad idea. At one time, the company actually was extracting the radioactivity out of this in the process and making uranium yellowcake for use in nuclear power plants after it was refined and in nuclear bombs. So this is a very serious matter that we need to get addressed. And we're glad to be here educating people about what's going on. The community is in arms, have been in arms, and we will continue to work on getting this situation cleaned up. And thank Milton for his words and knowledge, and thank everybody that's watching us for watching. And I have my contact information on the next slide, I believe.
You're welcome.
And Milton's information there also.
Thank you, Daryl and Milton. Some really great information, and I know that we got started a little bit late, and so we're trying to catch up here. So I'm just going to move right on to our next speaker, and our next speaker is Luella Phillips. And Luella is a longtime resident of Mulberry, Florida, where several gyp stacks are located. She lives near the Mosaic Fertilizer New Wales South gyp stack at the site of the 2016 sinkhole. So the floor is yours, Luella.
Hey guys, how are you? Can you guys hear me? Yeah. My connection's been going in and out this whole time. I don't know if you guys can hear me or not, but my name is Luella Phillips, and I live in Mulberry, Florida. I'm the administrator of and founder of 4067 EWAU, and like I say, I'm actually in the center of the gyp stacks, and I'm 3.7 miles from the Mosaic sinkhole, and as the crow flies, I'm probably maybe 4 or 5 miles from the Bartow stack. And then I have the Hooker's Prairie stack as the crow flies less than 1.5 miles on my south side, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, Rachel has a couple of slides I want to show you. On this one right here, we have an aerial view of the Mosaic sinkhole in 2016 when it occurred, and the picture next to it is the other cell, the other gyp stack that was active at the time. And after the sinkhole occurred, they taking phosphogypsum from those two active stacks and bringing them to the Bartow stack. And I think I have a couple of slides if Rachel wants to go to the next one. Okay, this is photographs probably 2 or 3 weeks after the sinkhole occurred. When it first happened, our water had changed to a dark brown, rusty type color water. It had large chunks of brown, mushy rock in it, and I wasn't aware of what was going on. And over the next few weeks, my water had changed and things like that, and discoloration and sediments and different sediments and stuff. I never took the photographs until after we found out there was an actual sinkhole. In the top left corner, these little black things that you can see on here, those were hard gray rocks that we had found in our water. And I know this is a picture of a toilet, but that's actually what color our water had turned. And we had beautiful, pristine, tasteful water before the sinkhole occurred. The one next to it is my feet in the bathtub, showing the turbidity in the water and how cloudy it was. And if we could go on to the next one. Okay, these are just comparisons. The top left corner is the Alafai River at the South Fork Prong in Bradley. This is the everyday color of the water, that yellow up there. And the bottle of water is the water that I got from my faucet, and it literally had clumps of algae in the water. And if you leave the water in the bottle for 2 or 3 weeks, the algae will get bigger and bigger. I actually gave a gallon of that to the DEP so they could have it tested, but I never heard anything back. Go figure. But either way, we can go to that's what we were expected to be drinking. So, okay, the top left corner again is the turbidity as it got worse. The right side is an actual photograph of the video from when the news came out to the house. I showed him a glass of water. When you held the water up in the light, you could see these tiny little white specks that look like bubbles. And actually what those were, if you were to leave them like in the bathtub, when the tub drained, they would melt like in the bathtub, and you literally have to scrape them off the bottom of the tub. They were real hard, almost like silicone. And that was in June of 2018. My water was still having issues sometimes, but okay. The next slide. Okay, this is my mother's hands. The left photograph, you can see the swelling in her hands in the center of it. And on the top of her hands, they literally turned blue. She was still using the water a few weeks after they announced the sinkhole, and I asked her not to, but she grew up here in this house. She really didn't think anything was wrong with it. But it would turn her hands blue and they would swell up. But like I say, my mom's old school. In this area here, we're a mining culture. We're not a mining town. We're a culture. And my mother's in her 70s, and she did not want to believe that the phosphate industry could actually affect your health. But either way, we go on to the next ones. She's better, by the way, with that. She's a lot better with that. She doesn't use the water to bathe in. So if we could go to the next slide. This is a rash that my youngest daughter got on her legs a couple of days after they announced the sinkhole. She wanted to take a bath, and I wouldn't let her because we were getting water from Mosaic. And in order to get the water from Mosaic, I literally had to call 2 news stations and have them call Mosaic and ask them to bring me water. And at one point, Mosaic was bringing me so much water that they stopped bringing it, and they sent me a letter saying that I was using too much. And I feel like if I can't drink the water, and I have 3 kids, if I can't drink it, why should I bathe them in it? So I was using a lot of water, and my little girl didn't happen to listen that day, and she snuck in there and rinsed her legs off in the water without taking a bath with the water that they were bringing. And this is what happened to her legs. It healed up in a couple of days, and some medicine that I put on there. If we could go on to the next slide. She was 6 at the time, by the way. Okay, this is a statement that I made on Facebook, and I was basically thanking the news media because they did a respectful broadcast, and they had contacted, like I said, they contacted Mosaic because Mosaic wasn't making people aware that they were bringing water or that people in the neighborhood could water. They didn't want to bring it, and we played heck getting it. And they finally did start bringing it to a few of us. I mean, the numbers went from 44 when I first started getting it from them up to over, I think it was 4,000 or something, which they pretty much cut off. I'm within the 4-mile radius of receiving the water, but they were still supposed to be checking our water. And at the bottom is just a statement that I made in February of 2017 saying that I had to take my daughter to the doctor to have her blood checked for lead poisoning because she was showing the signs. And if you know anything about lead poisoning, you can't get a lead poisoning test just by urinalysis test or something like that. Blood test, if you miss a day of drinking the toxin, you literally have to have a liver biopsy or something like that. So that was something that was really hard for us to go through with the kids. If we could go on to the next slide. By the way, my children haven't drank the water since 2016. We're still on bottled water. We buy our own. Okay, this is an insert from Facebook again, because I do a lot of Facebook posting. And this is when the kids came home with a note from the school, and they had posted signs at the school saying that they could not drink the water because they had some sort of contamination. The day before they sent the notes home, I had seen the city taking the hydrant and releasing the water, and the water was black, literally black. And that water was coming from one of the outfalls that flowed from the Alafai River from one of the stacks. And so the kids couldn't drink the water in school for a couple of days. The school was supposed to provide it, but they didn't. They provided, the janitors and the teachers provided water for the kids to drink. And they did put up signs all over Mulberry, the health department, stuff like that, saying they couldn't drink the water. This was when I was a little bit angry. The next insert is because the company that came out and checked our water is ECT, and ECT came out with a DEP to check our water. And my problem was before the DEP came out, which they didn't usually come out with them, you had to request that the DEP comes out. ECT it's a financial company. They're not water testers. They're not licensed people to come out and check my water. They're a company who tells Mosaic, the phosphate company, how to save money. And they were the ones who were actually in charge of coming out and checking our water, which I thought was a little, it was aggravating, to say the least. And I made that post. And if we can go on to the next one. This is the Mosaic stack last year. This was taken off, this photograph was taken from Highway 37 about a mile south of Bradley Junction, because they keep these stacks pretty much camouflaged. You can only see an area, and we're quite a ways from that stack. And the area before the stack, behind the palm trees there, that area was owned by someone who's buying a lot of land around here, and he's actually made an agreement with the phosphate company to lease that land so they can extend the acreage of that stack. So it's going to be, and they actually put a solar field right next to that. So, but the stacks are huge, and when they're running out of places to put them, they just keep adding on and adding on. So if we could go on to the next stack, or next picture. Okay, this photograph was taken. I was at a park in Bartow. Yeah, that one right there. That is the Bartow stack, and that's last year. That's drone footage, and I'm quite a ways from it, but you can see the enormous size of it at that point. There, at this point, it might be a little over 200 feet, but I know that in June of 2016, when the Mosaic sinkhole occurred, and they were transporting gypsum to the Bartow stack as another place to put it, and we're going to get mine. That stack was over. It was permitted for 400 feet in height, and it was 480 feet at that point. I'm sure they've spread it out since then, but it's growing in size. It was over 500 acres at one point. And this is my backyard. I'm actually on if you're looking at that photograph there, I'm probably 3 or 4 miles from that stack to the left there. So Okay, the next slide. Okay, the stack in the background again is photograph. That's the new whale stack. I was
Luella,
at the
you're starting
graveyard
to
in between
cut out a little bit.
Pierce and Brad.
Oh, I think we just lost Luella. Thank you very much. She's got some amazing stories, but and heartbreaking stories. So let's move on to what happens when the fertilizer plants go bankrupt. Again, keep your comments coming, and also, I'm sorry we started a little bit late, so we're going over a little bit. Hopefully people will be able to bear with us. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and it is Glenn Compton. Glenn is the chairman of Manitoba 88, a Florida nonprofit organization created and incorporated in 1968. Its environmental protection efforts protecting the public's health and preservation of the environment span more than 50 years. He will be discussing the Piney Point phosphogypsum stack in Palmetto, Florida. All yours, Glenn.
Hi. Well, thank you. That was quite unexpected. But next slide, please. Piney Point is located in Manatee County. It's defunct. It's no longer in operation, but it's still there. And it's probably in one of the worst possible places you could locate a phosphogypsum stack. It's adjacent to Tampa Bay. It's subject to storm surge. It's next to Bishop's Harbor, which is one of the prettiest places you can see in Florida. And it's also near TRC Aquatic Preserve. There's a saying in Manatee County that if you go to a Manatee County Commission 50 years from now, there's two things that will be on the agenda, sewage spills and Piney Point phosphate. So this isn't going away anytime soon. And anything that can go wrong did go wrong at this plant. Next slide. A little bit about the history. There's been 6 owners since it was constructed back in 1966. There's been numerous spills throughout the years. We had employee deaths back in 1991. The first company that owned it went bankrupt in 1993. Next slide. And so in January of 2001, we had another bankruptcy take place. In February of that same year, EPA came in and took over the operations of Piney Point. Then they handed it off to FDEP, Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And we had a storm that same year, and the dikes were in danger of collapsing. And in fact, according to the DEP statement, we had to discharge. The dikes were in danger of collapsing, and we could have lost it all. And that was back in November of 2001. And unfortunately, we're kind of in the same situation that we were back in 2001. And tomorrow, the Manatee County Commission has to decide what they're going to do about the current situation where we could lose it again, and possibly, ruin a very good aquatic preserve next door. There was also a lot of rain in the summer of 2003. And so what they had to do with the stack water is they put it onto large barges and they put it out into the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, about a mile offshore, and they dumped it. There was a lot of uproar because there was also red tide that same year, and they tried to link the two together, and there wasn't really enough data and analysis to say that the two were linked together. But common sense tells you that if you put a lot of stormwater and nutrient loaded water into the Gulf of Mexico, bad things are going to happen. The following year, we had over 1 billion gallons of water released into Bishop's Harbor, which is a relatively shallow area that feeds into Tampa Bay. And again, if you ever get a chance to go to Bishop's Harbor, it is one of the prettiest and used to be pristine areas in the state of Florida, but it's over the years has had more pollution enter into it from Piney Point than it should have ever received in its entire lifetime. Next slide. In 2006, the current owners bought the property. It's a limited liability corporation. It's HRK Holdings. They currently manage it. And I don't recommend a limited liability corporation owning a phosphogypsum stack, but that seems to be the way that things are done in the state of Florida. They had the great idea to accept some of the dredged material from Port Manatee, which is adjacent to Piney Point, and empty out one of the phosphogypsum stack ponds, and in its place put dredged material. In 2011, the liner that was underneath all this dredged material broke, and there was a tremendous amount of wastewater that went into Bishop's Harbor. Along with it was not only the contamination that was from the phosphogypsum stack, but it was also from the dredged material that came from Port Manatee. Next slide, please. So the current status of where we're at Piney Point is that there's almost 1 billion gallons of wastewater that's on site. The company has come in front of Manatee County Commission, and they're asking for help because they recognize that in a couple of years, the ponds are going to fill up, and there's a potential that they're going to reach capacity within the next 2 years. So right now, there's about 10 inches of remaining rainfall capacity. The graph that you see here shows you the probability of failure. And if you take a look at where it peaks out, within 4 years, if nothing is done on its current status, then we'll see a total failure of the stacks. Next slide, please. So the current alternatives that are being considered to try to get rid of the wastewater that's there, right now spray evaporation is taking place, but that doesn't get rid of any of the pollutants, and it doesn't stop any of the seepage that can get into the groundwater. Manatee County has agreed to accept 50,000 gallons per day from the site and put it into their wastewater treatment system. So that's where the taxpayers are kind of footing the bill to get rid of some of the wastewater right now. There's been a couple of companies that have approached the Manatee County Commission where they will treat and discharge into Bishop's Harbor. That's one thing that the County Commission is going to consider tomorrow to see whether or not that's the route they want to take. And also there's been a lot of presentations and talk over the years about underground injection control wells or deep water injection. And we all know that there's all kind of problems associated with that. You know, just because it's out of sight, out of mind doesn't necessarily mean that it's no longer harmful. But the two options at the bottom, treat and discharge, and underground injection control wells, one of those will probably be decided on tomorrow at the Manatee County Commission workshop that they have. Next slide, please. So what we have learned from Piney Point, there is no economically feasible or environmentally sound way to close an abandoned phosphogypsum stack. That's the bottom line. We've also learned that a limited liability corporation may not be the best managers of a phosphogypsum stack. They're coming back to the taxpayers and they're asking for help. If they don't get it, they're facing a possibility of a total collapse of the earthen dams. Prepare for the worst and expect the best doesn't apply here. There is no best. It's whether or not we can prevent the worst case from happening. So we're looking at a situation right now where the stacks continue to fill up with water, where we will either have a total collapse and annihilation of everything that's in its way, the plant and animal life, and annihilation is really not too strong of a term to use if that earthen dams do break, or we're going to deep well inject out of sight, out of mind, or we're going to treat and discharge into Bishop's Harbor, which has already received more pollution than it should ever have in its entire lifetime, or we're going to put it on a barge and we're going to put it out into the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. So there isn't a good solution here. And I wish I could be optimistic about what's happening, but the way things are going right now, it looks like we're going towards a catastrophic failure in a couple of years. So if you haven't heard about Piney Point yet, I'm afraid that in the future, in the very near future, you're probably going to hear about it. So again, there's no easy solution to this problem that exists here, and we can sit back and try to hope for the best, but there is no good solution at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenn. We've got one more speaker for today, and this is Jennifer Crossland. There have been a few questions about the Mississippi phosphates, and Jennifer is this person to talk about that.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Crossland. I'm an organizer with the Cherokee Concerned Citizens. Cherokee Concerned Citizens is a fence line community that organized to take action against industrial pollution. They first organized in 2013. The organization was started by Barbara Weckheser, a local resident in Cherokee subdivision. And I work closely with Barbara and another Barbara Nelson. Both are incredible women who have been advocating for their health and the health of their families and communities for the last 8 years. I provide organizing support. And so for the last 8 years, we have been our own investigators and scientists trying to figure out what is in the air, the land, and water that is making people sick. This residential community is located not only within probably half a mile from 2 large gypsum stacks. They're also located near Chevron refinery, a gas processing plant, a chemical plant, an LNG terminal, as well as 2 large shipbuilding operation and an oil and gas manufacturing organization industry. And all of these facilities release over 2 million tons of toxins in the air annually. So Mississippi phosphates and their gypsum stacks are just one among many problems facing this community. Over the last 8 years, we've done some, lots of different citizen science, but I don't have time to get into all of that, but I did want to mention a recent health study that was conducted in partnership with Dr. Wilma Supra with Lean that found that that all of the acute symptoms and the chronic symptoms our communities are facing were associated with the 7D chemicals released by these industrial facilities into the air. So there is chronic issues facing our community, including over 35 cases of cancer that we know of, and then also chronic issues around respiratory issues, sinus, eyes, nose, throat, skin irritations, rashes, stomach issues, extreme weight loss, chronic headaches, memory loss, and so much more. According to our health survey, 47% of those surveyed, we surveyed 80 folks in the neighborhood, which accounts for about a third of all residents in that neighborhood, consider themselves sick as opposed to healthy. And the average number of days that people report being sick in this community are 9 days a month, with a large percentage of people more than half of the times the month, so more than 15 days a month. Next slide. Mississippi Phosphates Corporation is a 40-acre site that began operating in the 1950s and produced diammonium phosphate, and it filed bankruptcy in 2014. And over the course of its operation, it produced 2 large gypsum waste stacks. And so you should be able to see this picture here pointing to the 2 gypsum stacks, and off to on the left side, you'll see that's the residential areas that are located. The first stack that started in 1958 and was officially closed the process for closure started in 2002 and was officially closed in 2005. That stack is 2,800 feet by 4,000 feet long and stands over 100 feet high, and was constructed on about 235 acres of land right near the Bayou Casat area where lots of folks fish. The other stack was started in 2005, and it started the process of closure around 2015. It is constructed at 400 million cubic feet of gypsum waste, and it was constructed on 350 acres of land, and it is about 120 feet high. Next slide. The gypsum waste is piped into enclosed ponds, and it contains high levels, just as was mentioned earlier, of fluoride, ammonia, phosphorus, and a range of heavy metals like mercury, cadmium, and lead, radioactive uranium, and radon. The pH levels range from 2 to 2.4 when they get tested. The first stack, the West Gypsum stack, is located. The first gypsum stack, the West Gypsum stack, sorry, getting a little confused in my notes here, presently discharges about 20,000 gallons per day and requires treatment before discharge. 1 inch of rainfall produces about 9 million gallons of the acid wastewater that must be treated. And our area has an average rainfall that is above 2 times the national average at 68 inches per year. And then in 2017, due to excessive rain and hurricane season, the EPA discharged 400 million gallons of partially treated wastewater during 5 emergency bypass events. The newest pile, the East Stack, that is expected to close, is in the process of closure, and is expected to close by 2022. Both sites are currently being managed by the EPA in partnership with our Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality. The EPA officially took over the site in 2017 after the environmental trust of $12 million that was created to manage the liability of this Mississippi Phosphates facility was completely exhausted. The water treatment operations and facility maintenance cost about $1 million per month, and the total cost of the cleanup is expected to exceed $100 million. When the EPA took it over in 2017, they also found sinkholes and potential structural integrity issues that threatens the potential collapse of the stacks. Next slide. There's still a lot we don't know about these sites, but what we do know, as other folks have attested to, is that these facilities are dangerous and risky business, threatening the life and safety of workers, communities, and environment. When we first began organizing, Mississippi Phosphates was one of our first major targets, in large part because of a major incident that led to the closure of Bayou Casat in 2013. And then in 2014, the plant was shut down twice by state officials due to reports of sulfuric acid mist drifting off-site and affecting the residents in East Pascagoula, as well as other industries along the Bayou Casat. In fact, it was these other industries that reported them to MDEQ. The result of these incidents led to criminal charges brought against the company, and then ultimately, which led to the company filing bankruptcy. In 2012, 2 workers were killed as a result of explosions on site. This was after OSHA found 4 serious violations in 2009 that threatened the safety of workers. And at the time, the company was only charged $5,000 for those serious violations. That same year, in 2009, the EPA issued a consent decree requiring the company to make $2.5 million worth of corrections. The EPA said that Pascagoula plant posed a danger to the health environment because of violations, including inadequate safety, improper storage, leaks of sulfuric acid, and leaks of phosphoric acid in the unlined ditches. The order was later modified in 2011 when they found corrosive water outside of one of the stack's perimeters. Next slide. An estimated 17 million gallons of wastewater was released in Bangs Lake and Grand Bay Estuary in Bayou Casat and Tillman Creek in April of 2005. It resulted in a devastating loss of vegetation and wildlife and had a significant impact on the fisheries and the estuary. The Grand Bay Estuary is a protected estuary that is located right behind the stack. In August of 2005, that's when Hurricane Katrina hit, and this, of course, also caused extensive damage. And I have not been able to find exactly how much wastewater was released and how much damage was caused. But if you can imagine that a heavy rainfall produced an estimated 17 million gallons and caused severe damage, what a 25-foot storm surge would have done. In fact, when I started organizing with this community, one of the questions that came up was, what did it look like after Katrina? And there were reports of fluorescent lime green glow substance all around the properties, as well as, industrial equipment and oily sludge all over people's homes, inside their homes and on the outside of their properties. No one reported or no one shared that there was never any tests done in the neighborhood. And as far as we know, no one ever basically went to check to make sure that it was safe for the residents to return. In preparing for this presentation, I've learned a lot about the threats of stacks. There's really hasn't been a lot communicated to the residents by the EPA since they took it over, as well as the MDEQ agent, MDEQ and other agencies that have been charged with protecting public health and managing oversight of this facility while it was in operation. The health risks have been downplayed by the agency, really saying things like the radioactive component of the site, the gypsum, is not of real concern. It's a low risk to the community and to the environment. And they did not tell us about the integrity issue. At least I don't remember them saying it, that they discovered in 2017 during any of their public meetings that they held in 2018. We left with the impression that the cleanup process, once it's complete, the risk would be over. And clearly, after hearing the presentations today, that is just simply not the case. And while the cleanup process has continued, we have not been contacted by the EPA in the last 3 years. There has not been another public meeting since that first one's in 2018. And we have not been contacted about the community action group and that community engagement process that we're entitled to as part of the Superfund process, despite several attempts to reach out to the EPA and different our community liaison person that we were appointed to. So, and I don't know, I think we're already over time, so I'll save there's a image here, a video that's 5 minutes long, but it just shows, oh, you've been playing it the whole time, haven't you? I've been reading my notes. Okay, perfect. So you can't see it from the road. So when I came across this video, I was just stunned to see how big this site is and how big these ponds of wastewater are. And this is something that, like I said, is not visible to residents from where they are. And really, a lot of us don't even know the full threat to the community. We're still trying to figure that out. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you to all our presenters. Now we're going to take some questions from the audience. We've got a few that someone backstage has pulled for us. We'll start with Brant Thorpe. Who buys the fertilizer? Can the issue be attacked from the demand side, e.g. spotlighting companies that purchase from Mosaic? A large portion of U.S. fertilizer that is produced is actually exported. Obviously, we in the United States end up keeping 100% of the waste, even though a large portion is exported. But a large portion is used in the United States as well, and that goes to the Midwest monocropping. Again, something that destroys soil health and really contributes to fertilizer runoff and problems with our waterways. So we really needed to transform our entire food system. That's not going to happen overnight, but again, I don't know how else to attack it from the demand side other than starting to have these types of conversations where we realize the full cost of fertilizer production. Let's see, any other questions? What are the possibilities with a direct hit from a hurricane? Does anybody want to take that? a direct hit from a hurricane is likely, especially in the Gulf where we're seeing an increase in hurricane activity. That would be a disaster. A lot of these stacks are engineering marvels. They've never been as large as they've been today. We haven't seen stacks this size. And the fertilizer industry has already admitted that the cost of maintaining these stacks at their current size is difficult. So I can't imagine them being able to withstand the storms that are to come. If you end up with a dam breach, we would see something like what happened in 2004 in Riverview, where millions, if not hundreds of millions of gallons of that processed wastewater, which is highly acidic. A lot of media likes to describe it as slightly acidic because it has a pH of 2, which is equivalent to lemon juice. 2 is the average. It can be as low as 0.5, and battery acid is 1. It can be very low, and that even at 2, even at lemon juice, when you're talking about millions of gallons being released at one time, that causes absolute devastation to the aquatic environment. That abrupt pH change, more than anything else, that causes those massive fish kills. So yeah, a direct hit from a hurricane would be a disaster.
A little anecdote about the acidity there. In an official EPA, I'm pretty sure it was an EPA visit of the Mississippi Phosphates stack or process. This is when they were still in operation right before they declared bankruptcy. One of the inspectors reported his boots melting due to the acid that was on the floor of the facility. So it's acidic. There's no question about it.
Okay, we have another question from Ashley Marie. What are the dangers of living near a stack? Is the air contaminated? Are there dangers when the stack is being actively added to? So again, an active stack is going to be emitting more than a closed stack, but that's when a stack is closed properly. When we're talking about those geomembrane liners, which are the current management practice. In Mississippi Phosphates, they've used a geosynthetic liner, which apparently is a better technology that hasn't been implemented anywhere else yet. So a closed stack is purportedly more safe than an active stack, but yet it's still going to be emitting radon gas at 20 picocuries per second is the radon flux for the standard that the EPA has set for a closed stack. And an active stack doesn't even have to have its radon flux measured at any time. So there are radon emissions coming out of the stack just in the form of gas and in the form of the actual radionuclides in the dust itself. In addition to those other toxins that we talked about, like arsenic and chromium, that again have their own cancer risk, you would also be inhaling that as well if you are actively inhaling phosphogypsum dust. So if it's a dusty, dry, windy day and there's erosion caused by the wind or some of the heavy earth moving equipment that's happening with construction activities on top of those stacks, I would do my best to avoid it. Let's see. Any other question? How do we stop new permits from being approved? From Candy Luther. That's a tough one because a lot of these permits are issued by the state, and we found that especially in the case of Florida, and I imagine the same in Idaho and Louisiana, there's quite a cozy relationship between regulators and the industry. It's part of why we're petitioning the EPA to regulate these stacks under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which would require the issuance of federal hazardous waste permits under Subtitle C. Again, those would be assumed by the states in most cases, so they would be issued by the states in that case, but those permit requirements would be much more onerous on the industry and result in a much safer disposal system. We would have 2 liners, for instance, a double leachate collection system. So the liners that we currently have, if we have them at all, right now allow for a certain amount of permeability. and that's just calculated as part of stack design. It's going to end up in the groundwater, whereas a hazardous waste facility would not allow that. There's also treatment requirements as part of the land disposal restrictions that regulations that go along with those permits that would be required, and then stricter capping requirements, enclosure and long-term care, financial assurances. So how do we stop new permits at the state level from being approved? We could try our best. I think our best bet at this point, though, is to try to get the increased federal oversight on these stacks, and that's partly why we've petitioned the EPA to better regulate them. Which reminds me to plug our petition one more time. Please go to www.phosphogypsumfreeamerica.org if you haven't already done so, and sign that people petition in support of our legal petition, and share that with as many people as you can. That would really help us out a lot in convincing the EPA to grant that petition. Let's see if we have any more comments, questions. What about future mining permits dumping into existing gyp stacks? I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm not aware of any mining operations dumping into existing gyp stacks, but if you have any information on that, please send that our way. I'd like to know about it. More questions? Who would lease land to them? Don't they know it will decrease the value? Usually the mining companies and I say mining companies and fertilizer companies interchangeably because it's a vertically integrated industry. Most mining companies are also fertilizer producing companies. So they own that land. No one's that's typically not leased land. So they own it, and for whatever reason, they feel that they have the right to do what they want with it. But yes, typically that land is owned by the fertilizer company.
Well, Luella did mention that there was somebody who was buying up land to look to rent or to lease it to Mosaic, and I mean my guess is if they were doing that, they were basically prospecting, and they knew they are making a bet that if Mosaic wants to expand, they can expand into this land that I just bought, and that was probably part of their investment decision if that's the case.
Yeah, and she may have been talking about mineral rights. A lot of people will sell their mineral rights over to the phosphate companies, with the idea being that eventually that company will then mine that area once no one's living there. Okay, truth and science. I'm seeing a lot of comments.
Yeah. One overarching thing that I'm seeing is just like what do we do? Because so much of this is existing. Like I see a question from Ashley and Marie. We literally live less than 1 to 2 miles from the stack. You can see it. Are these getting approved? And what do we do with these stacks that have been around since the 1950s? And I think that's really the question that we're wrestling with right now. And it's a complicated and a multi-step process. One, we need to stop new facilities. We need to stop expansion through things like having better regulations so they actually pay the costs of working with hazardous waste at the very least, and then reducing the need, and then finally figuring out what to do with this waste once it's produced, because it's radioactive and it doesn't just go away. So it's a multi-step process, and I, for one, don't have it all figured out, but that's what one of our goals is to try to figure out all those steps.
I agree. The first step would be to stop the expansion of existing stacks, existing active stacks. They're getting bigger than they've ever been. New Wales, with the 2016 sinkhole, for instance, is at close to 750 acres. It's now being expanded to an additional 231 acres. That'll be a behemoth, and it's already had 4 sinkholes, releasing hundreds of millions of gallons of processed water into the Florida aquifer. So because the industry has consolidated, we're in a place, we're almost in a too big to fail type situation where we're dependent on these fertilizer companies to keep operating so that they can keep maintaining these stacks. Because as we know, once these stacks become abandoned, like in the case of Mississippi Phosphates and Piney Point, we quickly run out of processed water capacity, and that becomes a taxpayer issue. So I think the first step would be to deal with these active stacks and getting those shut down, or not necessarily shut down, but at least handled as the hazardous waste products that they are, and regulated as such by the EPA.
Well, I think we've hit an hour and a half, so we should probably start wrapping things up here, I think, before we lose everybody.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining. I hope this was informative. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to, or any of our other guests that have already provided their email addresses, I'm going to post mine right in the comments. And then sign that petition, share it. I agree that trying to stop these stacks at the local level is probably your best bet after trying to get this federally regulated. So your local county commission hearings, your local municipalities, even getting them involved and aware, that's a good option as well. But as we've seen, the states have failed us under their watch. All of this damage has happened under their watch. Okay, guys, I think I'm going to end the broadcast now. Thank you so much.
Okay, you are.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.